Welcome, everyone. This is David Wangard in Connecticut, and I have the distinct privilege to introduce my scholarly colleague from Auckland again, Jason Stevens. Jason and I are just very pleased to have you join us again today for Webinar 2, What's Right? Exploring Moral Judgment and Its Development. And again, we're just so pleased to have your collaboration with us on this project. And I've had the distinct privilege of being able to do some school site visits for another agency this week, and I was reflecting with Jason my real privilege to recognize what we're doing in collaboration together, and my great esteem for him as a scholarly colleague and the work he's done to help us organize this. So without further ado, Jason, let's take it away on Webinar 2. And as we've said, if folks want to ask a question, just use the chat box, and we can open mics too if that helps at any point. So Jason, take it away.
All right. Thank you, David, and good afternoon to everyone there on the East Coast in the U.S. Good to be with you. Today, as David said, we're going to focus on our second lesson, and that concerns moral judgment and the question of what's right. And we want to explore exactly how people make moral judgments and how moral judgment itself and the reasoning behind it might develop over time. So I'm going to briefly get into the objectives for the day in a moment, but just as an overview here, I'll spend about 5 minutes doing a quick review of moral awareness that we discussed the last time we got together 2 weeks ago. To reinforce the ideas there, and then turn squarely to what moral reasoning is, and what's addressing that question of what's right, and then finally to our lesson templates and activity concerned with developing students' moral judgment. So for today, then, excuse me. We want to do a little review to refresh and refine your own understanding of moral awareness that we discussed last time. And then we want to get into trying to develop your understanding of moral judgment, particularly from, say, neo-Kohlbergian theories of moral reasoning and judgment. So we're coming out of a certain tradition, and we talked about a couple of theorists last week, Turiel and Jonathan Haidt in particular. Well, you'd say Turiel fits into a neo-Kohlbergian frame, and Haidt to some degree as well, but that's what we mean by that. So we'll get into some details there, and then we'll look again how we might promote the development of moral reasoning and judgment among students in your classroom. Our behavioral objective really for today is to get you thinking about how you're going to adapt the lesson template we'll talk about towards the end for your own classroom. We've gotten a couple of lesson plans and responses from some of you out there. A couple of you haven't, or one of you haven't used the actual template. We do ask that you use that just so we have a uniform template, a uniform form that people are using, so we can easily sort of look at it and process it. So maybe David will say more about that at the end. Finally, we hope, that this webinar, increases your enthusiasm and commitment for the project. So let's get into a little bit of a review then about what we discussed last time and trying to define the domain of morality and what's morality. And we talked about really Elliot Turiel's domain theory. And Haidt's 5 intuitive ethics that's come out of his moral foundations theory. So with respect to Turiel, as you'll recall, he thinks about morality, as most do, as a domain that concerns prescriptive judgments, prescriptions, right? That what we should or should not do. And for Turiel, as I noted, these concern justice, rights, and welfare. And it's about how people ought to relate to one another. And he wants to distinguish the moral domain, this domain that's these universal values with prescriptive force, from two other domains. The conventional domain that varies across culture, and that's really about describing practices. right? So it's descriptive. It's, well, people in this culture drive on the left-hand side of the road versus the right-hand side of the road, so on and so forth. And distinguish that further from the personal domain, which is basically where people are allowed to do what they want, to exercise their own preferences, goals, and desires. And so then we had a little bit of an activity, and one that I suggested you could do with your students. You could use different sets of behaviors. These are just 9 that I took from an activity where we actually had a list of 20 different behaviors we had students sorting. But from a modern Western perspective, the top fall into the personal domain, right? These are things that we allow individuals choice in doing, pretty much. And then in the red there, we have the conventional domain that concerns those cultural descriptive things. And then finally, in the blue, we have the moral domain, things that are more universal in their force or universal in their application and carry some prescriptive force. We also noted that these things overlap. These are Venn diagrams, and you know, something like stealing from a store, clearly against the law, but also has moral implications of, you know, defrauding somebody of something that is rightfully their own. So you know, so in these things, of course, as I said, can also vary across time. You know, where getting tattoos and hair coloring and body piercings, even, these were things that once maybe were more regulated by convention, and now only in kind of a postmodern 21st century, you know, do we really give individuals full freedom there? We also questioned whether, you know, I didn't put in, purposely didn't put any of the academic behaviors in there, but this, of course, is where we want you to go with your students in this kind of exercise, is really maybe after drawing out these more obvious examples, and then pulling in the academic dishonesty ones and how they might and where they might fit in this kind of domain theory. We wanted to further kind of illustrate or broaden. I should say that, you know, or I did say last time that the issues with care versus harm and fairness and cheating are ones that are more favored by, say, liberals or progressives, and what's less important typically, as the research shows, in the eyes of liberals and progressives as opposed to conservatives, are things like loyalty and authority and sanctity. But those are universal moral ethics or intuitive ethics, as Haidt talks about them. And so we use moral foundations theory here as really offering a broader perspective of what gets included in the moral domain. And it's also you know, a good way of recognizing where there might be differences across individuals, across religious groups, across cultural groups, in terms of how these particular values get ordered. But nonetheless, these 5, you know, seem to be robust. That is, that they appear across various cultures and play a role to varying degrees in how those cultures run. So that, you know, that's really what we wanted to, how we're defining morality here then in this project is helping, using Turiel's theory to help us distinguish moral domain from non-moral domain, and then Haidt's theory here, moral foundations theory, to help us really fill out what we mean by moral, and using these 5 ethics. In terms of developing students' moral awareness, we talked about the importance of really the key mechanism of really honing attention. The idea here is that the way we raise moral awareness is by paying much better attention to the situations that we're in. And once we're attending, of course, we can do some perceiving. I actually changed this slide around from last week, if you're wondering. So I put attention on top as sort of the top kind of conscious process of attending to a situation and then perceiving it. When we talk about attending to a situation, what we're talking about in particular, or the way that we want to hone that, of course, is by using this moral awareness protocol that we've developed, and that involves walking, walking through or helping students go through several steps we're going to use the first three. And again, we've adapted these from Narvaez and Endicott. But so we've created this protocol that really focuses on those first three steps. And it looks something like, like this. You map itself in the materials. But the idea is to get students to pay attention, to think about what kinds of problems or issues are present in the situation, if it's a moral situation, i.e. what moral values or ethics are present there, using Haidt's 5 intuitive ethics, and then clearly stating what the problem is, how it came about, and who's involved. All of this is groundwork, right, for then asking the question about what's right. So this helps us get at what's moral, and if we're in a moral situation, and then takes us to the question of what's right. And when confronted with life's dilemmas, how do we determine what's right? And what type of or level of reasoning do people use when making judgments? That's what we're going to explore here today. So to do that, let's take a look at our overarching thing. We're now here on component 2, moral judgment. And in our language of high versus low roads of ethics, what the high road is here is using moral principles when making judgments. And so the contrast then on the low road would be using personal interest or even social conventions when making judgments. So we're gonna flesh that out a little bit more here in the next 10 minutes. But that's what we're striving for here, is to encourage and increase students' use of moral principles when they're making judgments, and to maybe decrease their use of egocentric or personal concerns, or even conventional ones. So again, we love our graphics, and here we are in the blue now, moral judgment, and you can see the three prompts below under what one should not cheat if that becomes the issue, and that's the judgment. The reasoning we want to see then is one about fairness, and we would like to prioritize that blue, that reasoning in blue, that it's not fair to others, as opposed to simply saying it's against the rules, that's the convention, or that you might get caught, that's a personal interest. All three are valid, of course. What we're hoping for in the end, though, is that we prioritize, or that students come to prioritize really the moral principles and not the concerns from the other domains, if you will. So let's talk a little bit more then about moral reasoning, and really I suppose its development in the 20th century, mainly by people like Jean Piaget and particularly Lawrence Kohlberg, who were fascinated with cognitive development, but particularly moral development. And but as psychologists interested in cognitive development, their theories of moral development are really highly cognitive. That is, they involve a lot of reasoning. And Kohlberg in particular was famous for using hypothetical dilemmas. This, of course, being the most famous of them all, Heinz and the drug. And he used these as stimulus, right? This is the eliciting stimulus to prompt students or individuals in any event to think about what one should do in a dilemma situation like this. He wasn't so much interested, though, right, in whether or not you say Heinz should steal the drug or not steal the drug. That was actually really only of secondary or even tertiary interest to Kohlberg. The primary interest here is the reasoning that you use. So in this particular dilemma, right, we have a woman who's dying of a special kind of cancer in Europe, and a local pharmacist has made a drug, and he wants to sell this drug and charge essentially 10 times what it cost him to make him, and Heinz, the woman's husband, simply can't get together all that money. He can only get together about $2,000, about half of it, and he's sort of running out of time, it appears, and he pleads with the pharmacist, but to no avail. And Heinz, having tried every legal means, is getting desperate and considers breaking into the store to steal the drug. So the question is really kind of a twofold one, right? It's, well, what should he do? And we're going to call this kind of a, when we do this with students, there's sort of a preliminary decision, right? Well, and a lot of times our preliminary decisions are driven by intuition. And so we just have kind of an automatic response. It seems to me that, Hines should steal the drug or not steal the drug. And then when we're asked why, we have to sort of pause for a moment and think about it, right? And what would be some of the reasons. I'm sure each of you has an opinion and has probably done some reasoning about it. I don't think we're going to have the time to really to do that, to get into that right now, but let me illustrate for myself, so a little bit about how one might use these different levels or lenses of reasoning. So what we've done here, you see, is we've broken things into, we're going to use our 3 groups here. We've talked about the personal, the social, and the moral. So we're going to stay with that theme and then look about, and from a reasoning perspective, what do these mean, right? So so this is that deconstructing why you see up here in the corner. We're really interested in why you chose the course of action that you did. So if I'm thinking from a personal interest standpoint, I might say that Hines should steal the drug because his wife is really important to him and his well-being. Without his wife, who's going to, I hate to sound sort of sexist, but you could say, who's going to do the work around the house for Hines? And, his wife brings him great pleasure, and that's why he should steal it, because if he's missing her. Or conversely, you could say, well, he shouldn't steal it because of he might get caught and punished, right? Either way, the reasoning is very egocentric, right? It's concerned with that individual's own existence, and therefore it's a fairly low level of reasoning. One might bump up their level of reasoning and go to conventions and say that, well, Hines shouldn't steal the drug because it's simply against the law, and it would be wrong to do so. And if the law says it's wrong, then it's morally wrong as well. It's not until you maybe get to the moral level then that you might see that and a reason that Hines should say steal the drug because his wife's life is worth more than property rights. And so this is sort of the ultimate kind of moral argument, from a Kohlbergian perspective on this dilemma. The dilemma is one of pitting property rights against sort of right to life. And if it came really down to that, then Hines ought to steal the drug because of the human dignity and worth of a human life is greater than that of property rights. You'll notice that I put a couple of arrows here on the y-axis and the x-axis. This is because this is oh, I'm sorry. I should mention also, of course, loyalty, authority, and sanctity are also other sort of from Haidt's perspective, moral ethics or virtues or principles that might play here. I put those aside again. Remember, because some would say that that those fall into the social conventional. From a Kohlbergian perspective, these are a little suspect. If you just say that, well, Hines should not steal the drug because that's what authority says and what the law says, that from a reasoning perspective would be a little bit lower in a Kohlbergian framework than an appeal to a principle of fairness or care. So that's where it gets a little bit controversial, I think, is that those intuitive ethics that are in the box there and bordering the conventional and the moral are there because from a Kohlbergian liberal progressive perspective, those things start to slip into the conventional domain and seem like you're just obeying authority for the sake of obeying authority or being loyal for the sake of being loyal, as opposed to championing principles of fairness or care. What I mean from a developmental standpoint, as you see, as we can imagine, on the y-axis we have development, and then on the x-axis we have age, and and from Kohlberg's perspective, and from the research that was all very cross-cultural research as well, what is typical during childhood is this kind of pre-conventional, personal interest-oriented reasoning. Kids 3, 4, 5, 6 typically will adopt this kind of perspective. They do things because authority says so, that to avoid pain or maximize pleasure. And it's not until you get into mid-late childhood and through into adolescence that you're firmly reasoning with social conventions and making decisions and dilemmas. And then finally, it's really not until later adolescence and into adulthood that the use of moral principles becomes more dominant in people's reasoning about why one should take a certain course of action, such as stealing a drug or not stealing the drug in this case. So this is a developmental theory, and that's why we've laid it out here now in this kind of fashion, where personal interests are lowest and the conventions in the middle, and the moral principles are up high there. I've also created a little bit of a template here to show and illustrate what Kohlberg was saying, is that really the moral judgment itself, the judgment of, and for my moral judgment, the course of action that one has chosen here, almost is really quite secondary. You can use, that is, the level of reasonings, personal interests, social conventions, moral principles, to support either judgment. So it's important to realize that. And that makes it, that's what makes, I think, the domain of morality so rich and interesting, is that you can, in the end, really have what Kohlberg was most interested in exploring here is a moral dilemma. That is a dilemma between moral principles themselves. So, for instance, you could say that Heinz shouldn't steal the drug, and one of the moral principles might be kind of a utilitarian one. That is that in the end, stealing the drug and allowing people to, and giving them moral sanction for doing so is going to create chaos. It's more likely to cause harm in the end. Yeah, it might save his wife, and that's important, but it could lead to utter chaos and create a world of anarchy and problems. And in some sort of moral sense, what's the greatest good is going to be for Heinz to sort of comply with the law and not steal the drug on his own. Of course, we have to weigh that concern, though, against human life itself, and the dignity and worth of a human life, and whether or not that supersedes property rights, or some level of fair exchange anyway. In this case, so we see here that we have that good people, as it were, might reasonably disagree about what is a moral course of action in a given situation. But of course, there are other reasoning too here. We see with the social conventions. I didn't give an example of why he should steal the drug. There's clearly the social convention of that stealing is illegal, so it's against the law, and therefore would be wrong from that level. But also, and what's somewhat controversial here, you might say, is the reason to steal the drug at the conventional level, and that is that it's what a good husband would do. What's important here is that Heinz, in this sense, the reasoning here is about playing a particular role. It's not about saving his life, the life of his wife, and the fact that human life is worth more than property, but rather it's about playing a role. That's why that kind of response, that it's what a good husband would do, if you really unpacked it, would be just about role playing. It's about playing the role of. It doesn't, it's hard to for me to fully articulate that any more than that. But it's the reasoning here would be that you're just doing that because that's what the conventional, the role dictate, that the conventions of society dictate playing that role. So again, the main point here is that the actual choice of stealing or not stealing, or in the case of cheating or not cheating, there are reasons that could at all levels, personal interest, social, conventional, and moral, that could support either action choice. We're going to see that more specifically when we get into our example, which we will in just a second here. So our goal then is to, if I backed up for a second, is to sort of be using this framework, right? We want to think about this as our framework for enhancing moral reasoning. And we want to help students move to an appreciation of and adoption of using the moral principles in their reasoning, and preferring those moral principles over social, conventional, or personal interest in making moral judgments. So here we are wanting to develop this capacity to reason, and particularly using principles of fairness and care. At least from my perspective, these are the ones that are often the most applicable, the fairness and care. But the other ones of as we'll see, loyalty, sanctity, and authority are certainly going to play a role as well. Okay, so as with the previous PowerPoint and the lecture, we wanted to look at what are the key mechanisms here, and I've already talked about them a little bit, right? As we're trying to help students move from an awareness that they're in a moral situation, that moral values are at play here, to rendering a judgment about what the right course of action for one to take in a given situation. Well, the key mechanisms there are really twofold again. The first, as I alluded to earlier, is really intuition. Even before we, I think, engage in any kind of conscious reasoning, we always have an intuition about, what's sort of right or wrong. It's often just that gut feeling, something that tells us that, ooh, this is the wrong thing to be doing, or it's the right thing to be doing. But we don't want it to end there. Intuitions are powerful and they're important, but we don't want that to be the end of the process. We want there to be some reasoning. That is to be looking at that situation and what we've become aware of really more consciously. So here's that. I meant to have that go there. So reasoning is distinct from intuition in that it's a conscious, deliberative process as opposed to an unconscious, automatic process. And it really involves, weighing the different and competing considerations that are at play in the moral situation, as opposed to, again, just sort of intuitively feeling them and running with that and letting that be the end of the judgment process. We want to use those intuitions and listen to them, but not be totally dictated by them. We also want to use our conscious reasoning to help render decisions. So those are the processes that we want to be thinking of and aware of when we're trying to enhance students' moral judgment, is to recognize that both there's intuitions at play, but also reasoning can be at play if we harness it. So a typical dilemma then, or a type of dilemma that we might want you to use with students as practice for fostering that moral reasoning, would be something like the Laura dilemma. I think last week, I know last week or 2 weeks ago we shared a bunch of dilemmas. This is the second one. I think it's a little bit richer than that first one, right? The John and Jasmine one is pretty brief. This one's a little meatier in that it really gets into questions of, it brings into that loyalty, right, of Laura and whether or not this friend of hers, and what the limits and what the requirements, as it were, or limits of friendship entail. So Laura, being this bright student and well known for it, often gets some unwanted attention, and in this case, it concerns a friend of hers who wants some questions and answers to a test that Laura has just taken. This, by the way, of course, is a very common scenario, as you probably all well know, and probably happens in the hallway nearly every day in a public school. Laura, though, is conflicted. I think she has having her own intuition that this is somehow maybe not right, but she also doesn't want to upset her friend, and her friend is pretty keen and aware of that as well. and pushes Laura a bit and promptly and firmly ask her, what's it going to be? Is she going to help her or not? So what should Laura do in this situation? And more importantly, I guess, for us is why, because that's what we want to get at, is the why. Well, you're going to use, and I probably shouldn't have put these slides in here. I should have showed you that the EDMA first, the ethical decision-making protocol that we've developed, or activity that we've developed. But again, you could imagine, that either judgment, whether Laura refuses to help or she complies with her friend's request to help her cheat, that the reasoning could play out in a personal way, in a social conventional way, or a principled way. So quite clearly at the personal level, it'd be about that she might get caught and punished if she complies. Oh, I guess those are reversed then, right? If she refuses her friend, I'm sorry about that. Her friend, that should be reversed there in the green. So her friend would be mad, and she might lose her friend, and she doesn't want to lose her friend. Versus getting caught and punished, which most students, of course, don't fear, and happens very rarely in schools. Or conventional concerns it's against the rules. That's why she should refuse and not help her friend cheat. To a more one that, well, even though it's formally against the rules, in fact, the real convention around here de facto is that everybody does it. Everybody helps their friend cheat, and this kind of sharing of questions and answers is actually commonplace. We wanted to pause here and maybe ask you to think about what you would put in by way of moral principles. I don't know if anybody, we have the time or the technology to sort of have people chime in here. But I'm going to maybe move on and not assume we're going to do that, since we've got a few minutes left anyway. I've listed quite a few moral principles here as to why why somebody might not do it, or why Laura here might not do it. Fairness to other students would probably be a chief one. That not everybody would of course have access to a friend like Laura and get that competitive advantage, and so Laura sharing those questions and answers would clearly be unfair to others. Moreover, it would betray the trust of the teacher. Teachers do reuse questions and answers from tests, and they trust their students and ask their students, usually explicitly, not to share those. So doing so would clearly betray that trust. But you also might say that from a more of a purity, sanctity standpoint, and in Haidt's language, that it would violate her own sense of what is right, her own the purity, as it were, of her own kind of judgment and action. She wants to maintain this integration of the two things, right? She knows that it's wrong to do, maybe for the two reasons we just said, and she wants to maintain her integrity. Now, she might, though, actually come up with appeal to loyalty as a moral principle or ethic for helping her friend. That without doing so, her friend might might do poorly on the exam, and that would cause her some kind of harm, emotional, if not a real kind of harm. So in this sense, maybe even caring could be marshaled as an ethic, and loyalty and both caring could be marshaled as ethics, supporting Laura in a choice to help her friend cheat. So here again is where, if we focus on those last two, that's where really the dilemma comes in. That's where the genuine moral dilemma comes in, and that it is one I think that students in this situation really truly feel. I think they are definitely conflicted and think that that this is what a good friend does. This is what loyalty is about, and they want to help their friends, and even if it is sort of wrong, they're doing something that's against the school rules, and that's what they usually do. They usually compare it to the school rule, right? They don't go to, they say that, helping my friend is more important than a school rule, and they don't make the fair comparison to the other moral principles. And that's what you're going to want to sort of help highlight with them, or what we hope the process will help highlight, is that, that this is a genuine dilemma, mind you, but on balance, we think there's more moral principles in favor of refusing to help and not cheating than there is complying with and cheating. So let's go. Let's take a look at this EDMA that I just mentioned, in the process that we want you to engage your students in. Much like with the AMAP, this ethical decision-making activity has several parts and components. And it kind of picks up where you noticed where we, where the AMAP left off, and so students can combine these, right? And then moving from one to the other should be somewhat seamless. You can be using the same scenario, right? Like this Laura one. But the idea at this point, the first step is, okay, well, what are the action choices? Laura can refuse or she can comply, and they can spell out the consequences there. So there's this listing as the first sort of process in the EDMA. The second then would be deciding. And again, we're going to call this really a preliminary choice in a certain sense, and we're going to want individuals to really maybe be doing this by themselves, these first three steps. So they list, they decide, and then finally the reasoning here of explaining. So this can be done in relatively short order with students doing it independently. We would then suggest transitioning to a group activity, and the template, if you've looked at them that David has uploaded, will give you some more space to do this. But and for students to do this, it's kind of a little bit of a worksheet approach where they can fill in the action and reasoning choices that they made as individuals. So there's a sharing out, an exchanging of ideas of what people think is the right thing to do, and the reason why that's the right thing to do. And then they would get into dissecting, into really analyzing, using Haidt's intuitive ethics and the lenses of reasoning, those lenses / levels of reasoning, to break down and reach some kind of an agreement, with respect to what ethics and lenses of reasoning are involved in the choices and the reasoning that they just shared. Finally, as a group, we want them to, in so much as they can come to a group decision, decide what they think is the right thing for, in this case, Laura to do, or X, whoever the protagonist is, and why that is so. And then finally, you could culminate this into a reflection activity where the individual now goes back for themselves and looks back at their first judgment and their reasoning, to see if there's any changes there, and if so, how their judgment or their reasoning changed and why it did so. So again, with this activity, we really want you to engage students in three sub-activities: a little bit of individual work to begin with, small group activity, which is really kind of the bulk of the time there, and then finally an individual reflection activity. This is just another example or a way that we've organized this in a way of thinking about how students might process and use the three central questions here. So that's what that's for. Let's see here. Okay, finally, the lesson template. As I noted earlier, some of you in doing lessons for lesson 1, you kind of you didn't use the actual 4 core categories or the template that we sent. We'd really like you to use that, just so we have uniformity, across the different teachers, across different schools. A lot easier for us to process. If you need to add categories or something, I get, certainly you could do that, but we do want you to use, have these 4 categories and use the template and just edit that, if you will. So much like with the AMAP and the lesson template 1, we envision students being put into small groups. You have access to this PowerPoint, the activity protocols itself, and any technology you need to run it. Here again, for our goals is we want to really strengthen the reasoning. yeah, we focus a little bit on the judgments, but really this activity is about having kids really explore their reasoning for making those judgments. We're not really almost, very concerned about what they say should be done or not done. We really want to get at the reasoning and promote that. So the goal is, the objectives then specifically is using, through use of the EDMA, through those steps, increasing students' capacity to go through to make an informed or reasoned decision. Hopefully, and this is the aspirational objective here, right? In doing so and getting some practice, hopefully they'll see the value and ultimately the preference for using principled reasoning when making ethical decisions. The activities, again, this is really meant to be, inquiry, right? You're asking students to think about for themselves, and then ultimately in smaller groups, what's right, and to really discuss this and think hard about it using the resources given. Okay, I'm not going to read through the rest of this just because we're getting a little bit low on time, and I want to respect that. So I want to use the last few minutes then to take any questions, comments, suggestions that anybody might have.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Jason. And what I'm going to do now, I've kept the mics muted just so that we didn't get feedback in the system but I'm going to unmute everybody's mic now just for the sake of time. And we'll see how that works. So Jay, you're unmuted. Ken, Bob, Laura, you're unmuted. Mark, you're unmuted. Regina,
I'm seeing before anybody asks a question, I'm seeing Regina just pop something up into chat. Yeah, we're going to be doing, again, this year is not, this project right now is really to sort of do this training and to have this and to have you be able to use this curriculum in your classrooms. We will be doing some pre and post testing. It'd be more probably at the very beginning, in the end, with students, but it's not our major concern in this project, is looking at students' changes. What we're interested in really is changes in you, and you're using these activities and being able to do so comfortably, and we're less worried about the student pre and posting at this point. So,
but we will be implementing next fall. We will be implementing a pre-test and a post-test. But again, as we talked about in our introductory meetings, all of this is just being piloted just to see how well the process works. And to come at some point in November of next fall for you guys to say this is doable.
Yeah. Yeah. So that pre-test or post-test then would be like kind of maybe just a single general one at the beginning before you even launch into the 4 lessons, and then one at the end. Now, of course, you could be these activity sheets that you're doing with students themselves could be data, and information for us. And so, we can talk later about maybe we should collect some of those and, to see if students are progressing. But we'll probably have, just a general pre and post, much like we did with you guys. You all took a pre-test on SurveyMonkey. We could make it available for online with students, or it could be a hard copy that you administer during class time. We'll talk more about that in our final session, our final webinar.
Yeah, it's a good question, Regina. Acknowledging the chat type, but you're probably ahead of our curve on that.
Okay.
Okay. Other questions, comments, concerns? This is a lot, right? There's a lot of introducing some new frameworks for you guys and asking you to think about how you can adapt this to your classroom. So it's, I'm sure that there's lots of room here for for questioning.
Can I ask, while we have some of you live with us online, has anyone not been able to access the blog and the resources for Lesson 1? I hear typing.
So everybody's got access. It sounds like everybody's got access. That's good. Yeah.
So similarly, this PowerPoint, the lesson outline template for Lesson 2, and that's what Jason's referring to. We're hoping you can use these templates, and they're just Word documents, so you're able to save them to your computer and edit them to create your own lesson outline. We'd like you to use that structure and to create the lesson. And we are looking for each individual teacher to have their unique lesson for their subject area. So if you're working as a team, that's great. We'd like to see how you would apply, uniquely to your academic area, the lesson discussion.
Yeah, unless you're in the same subject area. There are, if you're two English teachers, working together, and you're going to use the exact same lesson, then that's great. Otherwise, as David said, yeah, we expect that, yeah, the examples that you use, and there's going to be some tailoring needed. If you're a science teacher, then you want to change these dilemmas or the material we've given you, or select material that's more more connected to science versus English or social studies. So there is some tailoring. We've given you these templates, but they're meant to be a little bit fluid, so you can alter them to really fit your context. And we want to see that.
I was trying to find another lesson that one of the lessons I've done, but I can't find it.
I don't know if you're close enough to the mic.
Okay. Any?
Yeah, Laura has a question.
Okay,
Do you want
Laura.
us to email you any lesson plans that we've created and used?
Can you repeat that? I missed the beginning.
Do you want us to email you any lesson plans that we've created and used?
We're hoping to, if you've created a lesson plan with our template, we'd like to collect those, and then we want to have some dialogue with you about the lesson plan, and ultimately our goal was to post all of these lesson plans on the blog, with your permission, of course, but submit them to me, and then we'll have dialogue about posting it on our blog as examples to others. So yes, we are trying to collect in the format of the template we're providing, and ultimately then our goal would be to have these 5 different lessons, one for each component, and then the summative lesson posted on the blog.
Yeah, yeah, we definitely want to do that, and we also want us to be sharing with each other. So Laura, maybe you've done something really cool and interesting, and then for others to be able to pick up on that and use it at another school. So we were hoping that having different teachers in different schools and different areas, there's a lot of room for some cross-fertilization, if you will, and we can benefit from the good ideas of each other. So the posting and the sharing component, I think, is pretty critical, I think, to, in the end, getting us to a strong product, right? We're creating something new here. So, the more good minds we have working on it, the better. And the more open we are about it, the better.
And just to repeat that the no blog posting will happen without your permission, and I'm the only one that can post to the blog. You need to send me the lesson, and I'll do the posting of it, but I'll do it after I have your permission.
Can we revisit some of the couple of the lessons do you have the lessons that we wrote last year?
We do?
I'm looking, actually, I have to say, I'm looking for them now, and I can't find them on my disk, but I was just wondering if, I did start to deliver the lessons last year, at least the first 2, and I wanted to kind of just work on revising that a little bit, but I can't find it. So if you have it,
I'm happy to send that to you, Regina.
all right.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah, that'd be great, Regina. We'd love to know, what you did and how it went, and how you'd improve it. Yeah, that'd be excellent. Yeah, so David, thank you for getting that to Regina then. Okay, well, we don't want to keep you beyond the 45, and I think we're there. So let's see. Do we have any? If you have any more, there is options for them to post questions and comments on the blog, though, right, David?
Sure.
Yeah.
And it's just the lesson posting is something I'll do, and email us. I mean, we're still, the blog is mainly to exchange information between all the schools, but if you have questions and want to email Jason or I, we certainly welcome
Yeah.
that. And
yeah, don't hesitate at all. Email, like if you've just got you're just yourself, an individual question, you're getting hung up on something, you need a little help. Yeah, a question for clarification, anything at all, email us. Really, this is our job right now. We've got this grant, we want to make this project work, and we know we're doing it through, digitally right now, right, over the internet and this kind of training, and but and I can feel distance, but we're and even if we are thousands of miles apart, or I am, still here. Definitely email, and we'll respond within usually 24 hours. So, so on that note, we hope you enjoyed this webinar and that you find that the template useful. And we ask that you work on this and send something to David with some ideas, some revisions of that template before our next webinar, which will be on Monday the 22nd, 2 weeks from today, same time, same channel, and we're going to focus on really the moral commitment component and the central question here of, am I responsible? And exploring what that means, moral commitment, and how it might develop.
Well, everyone, again, thank you very much, and thank you too, Jason, for the clarity and the good organization, and I look forward to our continued collaboration. And just a heads up, I'll be sending an email to note when this material is posted to our blog, and I'm also going to be following up to set up some individual team follow-up meetings, either in person or maybe we have just our own individual go-to-meeting, but you can look forward to that as well. So thank you again. I'm going to stop the recording now, and then we'll be signing off.
Thanks, everyone.